Good evening, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this new lecture as part of the series of lectures delivered by the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. Of course, the center gives particular attention to the issues, topics in the region and Arab issues. Here, we are going to talk about the latest Israeli elections. And of course, as you remember, we talked about it around 3.5 years before now, in April 2019. I think it was appropriate back then, and it is now it is important to tackle this topic in order to discuss the repercussions on the Palestinian cause, the region, and also the relations between Israel and countries outside the region. Throughout the last 4 years, Israel witnessed five successive elections. In 2019 alone, there was two elections. There were two elections in April 2019 and September 2019 as well. The division back then centered on the persona of Netanyahu. There was no political program that was the source of the division, but it was the persona of Netanyahu, and the same thing continued throughout these years until we reach the elections that we are going to talk about today. The Israeli society shifted towards the right, and of course, so we know that the Zionist movement ruled for 3 decades, since 48 till 77. During this lecture, of course, Dr. Azmi Bishara is well placed to talk about this topic. So during this lecture, we are going to talk about the different aspects relating to the latest Israeli elections. What does it mean, the fact that the Israeli society is moving towards the right. So the division is between the right and the extreme right. And we are going to talk about the repercussions, the results, the outcomes, and the government that Netanyahu is going to form for the next 4 years. So the repercussions for the Palestinian cause and in the region. Dr. Azmi, of course, does not need to be introduced, but I would like to introduce him anyhow. He is the Director General of the Arab Center, and he is the head of the Board of Trustees of the Doha Institute. He is a well-known Arab intellectual who published in several journals, magazines, and he has several books in philosophy, and he has a book about the civil society and also Arab democracy and religion and secularism in historical overview. Also, books about revolution, army, and politics, and also Arab specimens, and also about freedom, about sectarianism, denominations, and about Salafism, and also ISIS, and also answering the question about populism. And I know that Dr. Azmi is working on a book now about the state. Dr. Azmi also worked about or worked on the history of revolutions and archiving since 2012 in Tunisia, in Syria as well. Some of these books, most of these books, have been translated or are currently being translated into Arabic. Of course, the revolution about Egypt, the revolution about Tunisia, or the book about the revolution in Tunisia and in Egypt, both of them were translated already. And there are several other publications. I'm not going to name them all. You can actually visit the website of the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. And now I give the floor to Dr. Azmi Bishara to deliver his lecture. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Marwan. I would like to thank the unit, and I would like to thank you all for attending. thank you for being here, and I would like to thank the policy or politics unit. And when we talked about this, I said that last year I had a lecture. They said the lecture was 3.5 years ago. So it's crazy. Time is flying, maybe in this country, or maybe as we grow older, we feel time is going faster and faster. I imagine that the lecture was delivered last year. There are things that need to be tackled. I think each and every Arab citizen is interested in this topic. Here we are going to tackle it from a scientific perspective, especially that samples of uh, colonial settlements and also what we're going to talk about now. This is very important for people who want to understand the rise of states, the rise of institutions, the identity, the role of the military. So we are talking about a state at the end of the day, be it legitimate or illegitimate, but we are talking about state institutions. So personally, I am interested in political theory and philosophy, and now I am interested in the topic of the state. So it is very important for us to study the concept, this building of a state, an illegal, illegitimate state. This is some sort of lab that we can make use of in order to study the elements of the state. For instance, in the Arab world, we have the armed factions that result from the revolutions, and also the difficulty to build a state afterwards, or the armed factions that are the result of the sectarian divide in the countries. So this reminds me uh, about philosophy and also social sciences, about the definition of the state that monopolizes the legitimate power or violence, and this is the foundation upon which other state institutions are built. In 48 and 49 in Israel, they had several armed factions. What did they do? They oppressed them, and they built the Israeli army. They did not allow them to continue, not even for a single day. So the order of the day of Ben Gurion, who founded this colonial state, the illegitimate state. So uh, he focused on the fact that the state is the only entity that can use power or violence, and also the relation between the identity and the state institutions. Of course, Israel is the only entity as a state that has control over violence within its institutions, of course, from its own perspective. Of course, we have a military, we have an army, we do not have other armed factions. I would like to remind the brothers in Lebanon and Iraq, etc. So there's a big question regarding the state in the presence of other factions, other armed factions. So the fact that there is some sort of rapprochement at the level of the identity, and there's a question about the identity, national identity, and the relation between this and the state. If we say that the state represents the identity of the people, violence is not needed that much. Diversity is common. So there are several factors if we observe the rise of similar entities. Of course, in the past there were colonial entities, but this entity is unique. It is like the South African sample, and it created a regime that is an apartheid-like regime. And I highlighted this topic about or in a book Today I'm going to talk about the institutions, the different elements, factors. We are going to talk about the elections. We are talking about a state that had 5 elections in 4 years, and stability was guaranteed. Nothing happened. So the institutions are stable, the central bank is functional. The army has one leadership and the police as well. The other state institutions are functional. The media, the services, the ministries. There is a political divide, political disagreement, but nobody is questioning the state. This is important because we are talking about a state that went through 4 elections and economic growth was not affected. The citizens did not feel that because the political divide is separate from the institutions. From their perspective, we are talking about the science today. Why is it very important? Because we should consider how political divide is actually dividing and leading to the collapse of the states and questioning their very existence. In the Arab Mashriq, there is a political divide that became social and vice versa, and the work of the state institutions is hindered. This is a very important question when we study the result, and we can benefit to understand why is this the situation in Israel, while in our countries there is a question mark. Why here the political struggles, political issues, and divide is separate from the existence of a state? In my book, I work on the separation between the regime and the state. When does it happen and when does it not happen? Sometimes people talk about treason when people have struggle against the regime. But here there is a big divide as to who is going to rule, but nobody is questioning the state. This is a very important factor for any state in the absence of foreign threat. So the fifth elections in 4 years, of course, the results were equal in the past. We're not talking about left and right. This is mentioned in the media. No, we're not talking about a divide between the right and the left. Of course, the divide in the last 4 years was not a divide between the right and the left. We can talk about the Netanyahu bloc and the anti-Netanyahu bloc. So there was a disagreement regarding the persona of Netanyahu, and especially that he is the longest ruling prime minister from 96 to 99 and from 2009 to 2020 or 2021, the last elections. Yes, June 2021. He is the longest serving prime minister, and he is facing corruption charges, and there is a divide. In the right, some of the right is ready to be in an alliance with the center, and other members of the right are close to Netanyahu. So here we are seeing two equal blocs, and they were not capable of forming a government. Now we have the latest elections, and the bloc of Netanyahu got 64 seats. This is the result. Is it in English? Here it's in English. Perfect. So here is the result. So I had an interview 2 days ago. Of course, I cannot give an example or explain the numbers. Here, if you can see, 1, 2, 3, the third category. So the Zionist, religious Zionism, and the Jewish movement. So I will explain what we need by religious Zionism. Religious or when we talk about national groups that are religious, usually the nationalists are secular. Only in Israel there is this category. So we're talking about nationalist movement that is religious. So from 6 to 14 and the green, so 8 more seats. 8 more seats. In the bottom, so you see Jewish home. It was 7, now it has 0 seats. All of them became in the religious Zionism and Otzma Yehudit. So we're talking about extremists who lost and extremists who won. So this is within the right. So the third one is right with Netanyahu, and the other is against Netanyahu. We can explain this if you are interested at a later stage. But this is a shift within the extreme right. And the other shift, so the Gantz and Tsar, the national unity. Gantz, of course, launched the war on Gaza in 2014, and he was the manager of the Netanyahu office. So they were 14, now they became 12. They went to the Likud. Likud was 30, now it became 32. These shifts are shifts within the right wing. Why? The right wing that was not capable of forming a government became capable of forming a government because some parties were affected and decided to take this measure. The first thing is that the other bloc that is against Netanyahu was ready to rely on the votes of Arab MPs and the formation of the government. This is why the Jewish home did not get any seat, because they do not accept an Arab coalition or alliance in the parliament. An extreme right party that believes in Israel, the settlements, etc. So they did not accept the Arab votes. So they lost them all. And also the second point is if you see the Gantz and Saar. My analysis is when there is a strong resistance in the occupied territories and attacks against soldiers, etc., the society shifts toward the right. So the groups that support the idea of security, and we know that there are other parties, and they lost votes in favor of Netanyahu. Why? Because any armed movement in the West Bank results in a shift towards the right and more extremism within the society of Israel. The second factor that affected was the disappearance of left parties. Go with me to the second party led by Yair Lapid, which is uh, Yesh Atid. So here we are talking about right party, or party of the right, the economic level, and there is some left in it, and they inherited the Zionist left, the middle class that wants to live a liberal, secular life when it comes to the personal status, and they are supportive of these right liberal parties that inherited the Zionist left. You see the supporters in Tel Aviv, in the big cities where people want to live a Western lifestyle. They are in favor of peace according to their conditions. So, in my opinion, they are the liberal right. You can see that in 2022, 24, and in 2021 they had 17. Merits down there. Merits, this is the Zionist left. There were 6, now it's 0. Where did they get the 17 to 24? So this is within the anti-Netanyahu bloc. We had a shift from the left to the liberals. So the Zionist left had 6, now it became 0. And Labor is the Zionist left. It actually founded the state of Israel, founded the army, was led by Ben Gurion, and launched the war of 67 and 73. The first Intifada was during his rule. So this is Labor Party. So in 2021, they had 7 seats. They used to rule the country even in 67, the first time, or 77, when the Likud reached power. This party was alone, just like Eastern European countries. Now, so they had 7, and in the latest elections, 4. 4. So this boosted Lapid, but of course they accuse the Arabs. In reality, the Zionist left disappeared and weakened this bloc. Of course, the Arabs could have had more MPs, but there is not a big change. So these are lies. So they were 10, they remain 10. So this is basically lies, and I find it strange that Arab TV stations actually say so. So the Zionist left disappeared. Why did Netanyahu win? Arab votes, but they were 10 in 2021 and they are still 10. So now 5 instead of 6-4. So it is true that the Democrats lost. However, without this, the number of Arab MPs did not change, 10, and many of them are ready to be in an alliance with the Zionist bloc represented by Lapid. So be in a coalition or in an alliance, and the government relied on them. So there is nothing to do with the Arabs here. So I hope that this table clarifies the idea. At the end of the lecture, I will be tackling, if we have time, the future of the Arab votes in Israel and the Arab parties. So if people are asking questions, what happened? How did Netanyahu win? So Netanyahu won, and he will form a coalition. And this government does not have necessary to rely on 64 MPs. He might need, in order to reduce the extortion of the religious Zionism, so he might convince MPs from other right parties to join the coalition to reduce this extortion. If you examine this situation, if you are interested, the right parties, the secular right parties, Israel Beituna, so Israel Beitunu, led by Lieberman, and the National Unity, led by Gantz and Saar, and it used to be called Jewish Home, led by the former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. So these 3 worked with Netanyahu. I will be talking about it. and they were all the uh, managers of Netanyahu's office, and they created country parties, sorry, against Netanyahu. There's a disagreement with Netanyahu. There are several charges pressed against Netanyahu. So uh, these are the accusations. These are the prominent cases against Netanyahu and court. So the liberals who have the uh, principles of Zionism at heart consider that he cannot rule the country even if they use the national demagogy. So he shouldn't be allowed to rule. So, of course, there are other disagreements regarding him ruling unilaterally and marginalizing any other prominent figure, the lies, etc. So his personality and also some criminal cases. However, he insists to keep uh, leading the country. So these are the most important cases. And the second point that is important is the rise of Zionist uh, or religious Zionism. This is one of the most important factors when it comes to the struggle with Israel. After the occupation of 1967, of course, these were the managers of Netanyahu's office. Gideon Saar, Lieberman is well known. He was foreign minister for a while. So now, religious Zionism, which is what I want to tackle, it is important for people who study the religious movements in our countries. Of course, there's a major difference, but I'm talking from a scientific perspective. In this country, where there is no distinction between the nation and nationalism, the religious nation, the Jewish nation is Jewish, being Jewish, or having or, so this as a religion. Of course, the Jewish religion does not welcome people from outside this group. So, being member of this group is equal to being member of the Zionist nationalism. At the beginning, people who created Israel led the armed militias against the Arabs. In general, they were seculars. They were socialist movements. They were active in Eastern European countries at the level of the labor movement. They had Marxist ideas. They tried to bring it together with Zionism. They did not agree with the communists, and they did not agree with the liberal Democrats in Western Europe, who considered that the salvation for the Jewish people is through democracy. A secular state, a liberal, democratic, secular state is the solution according to them. So this is one of the different religions. Of course, the objective for those people is to establish, or was to establish, a national state. The leaders were secular from the left, and the religious Jews, of course, there is no deep discussions regarding this topic. I'm talking about people who are interested, or with people who are interested. So the Orthodox movement, the ultra-Orthodox, of course, this is not accurate. This is not accurate because the accurate translation from Hebrew would be the extremist movement. So they wanted to live outside of the city, and the Jewish people would want to live in ghettos, and they would wait for the Messiah. The Messiah would save the Jews and establish the kingdom of God. So those people considered that Zionism is actually infidelity and disbelief, and this is blasphemy because they were interfering in the work of the Creator. So for them, uh, they used to consider Zionists as unbelievers. Now we have a few groups in London and New York and also in Israel. But all of the movements used to consider this, and there were Zionist religious individuals, and of course, at the level of the philosophy, there's a difference between the interaction with foreign actors and domestic actors. So they were religious people and nationalists. So they were called the Nafdal. They actually joined the Israeli government and left religion to their private lives. So they were nationalists, they were citizens of Israel. As individuals, they were religious and they did not mix the two aspects. When it comes to the settlement society, so after the creation of the settlements in 1967 in the West Bank, there was something completely new, especially after some sort of feeling, this miraculous feeling that there was a miracle that happened with the victory of 1967. For many religious Jews, this victory was similar to the interference of God in the world. It was a miracle, and it means that the Zionist movement is miraculous. So they started seeing the nationalist element as religious. Also, the miracle was that the land of Israel has become the state of Israel. So Yehuda and Samara. So we are talking about Nablus and Jericho. Of course, Jerusalem as well. According to them, before 1967, Tel Aviv and Haifa, this is something completely different. But when they occupied in 1967, there was a match between the historic land of Israel and the state of Israel. So the nationalist movement became higher. So now we had religious and religious Zionist movements actually. I wrote about it in my book, and I expected that the Zionist religious movement is going to be on the rise and get the majority in Israel.
Now, their social base seems little 450 settlers in Jerusalem, around 220,000. This number of settlers in Jerusalem, this is in the West Bank without Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, there is 220 to 230,000. Half of East Jerusalem is settled for Jewish settlers. This is East Jerusalem, not West Jerusalem. So far as this is concerned, unlike what I call the orthodox or extremist religious movements, these ones they serve in the army, the others they don't. The extremist religious groups which did not recognize Zionism, they are not very active in the economy except for the banking service. In agriculture or industry, they're not very active. These are like the early settlers. They join the army, they work in agriculture and in industry too. So, if the others did not constitute a danger for Arabs and Palestinians, these are at the heart of this danger. The, is, in the beginnings, the elite units of the Israeli army were members of the kibbutz, and they join the army. They become generals and commanders of the army. This is being. I just want to show you Smotrich. This is not his name. This is a name of a town in the Ukraine. He is from the Ukraine. This is where he gets this name from. This is the leader of the religious Zionist party, and the other, Itamar Ben Gvir, is of Kurdish origin. He was part of the Kach movement, and very briefly, he was a terrorist. He used weapons against civilians, and he organized groups to oppress Arabs. His last adventures were last year, May last year, when the uprising or the agitation to defend the dignity of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and Arabs took part in that in Jerusalem and other areas. There were militias, Jewish militias, who attacked Arabs in Tel Aviv, Jaffa, and Jerusalem and others. They belong to him, and he focuses on establishing militias on the Palestinian Arabs inside the 48 areas, and he considers loyalty and allegiance to Israel as the condition for citizenship, and no other loyalty or allegiance is allowed. And the idea of Meir Kahane, the Rabbi Meir Kahane started, and the United States considered him as a terrorist. And after the attack on the Abrahamic Mosque by Baruch Goldstein, who was a follower of Baruch Goldstein, and his attack led to considering the Kach movement as a terrorist organization. So, practically speaking, for all intents and purposes, he is considered a terrorist. And of course, they're very provocative. All settlers are provocative, in fact, when they carry out attacks on individuals' houses, armed attacks, and from and I think the Israeli terrorist organizations, the Jewish terrorist organization, whose members were arrested, and even Israel arrested them, and they were aiming to destroying the Aqsa Mosque. And he was among the people who were at that when the rabbis issued edicts killing rabbi Rabin, sorry, and they issued this edict to kill Rabin because he was, in their opinion, he was relying on the votes of five Arab members in the Knesset, and he was accused of giving Israeli land to Arabs. And for this reason, there were demonstrations which shook the basis of the grassroots support for Rabin, and that was at that time a number of martyrdom operations by Hamas and Islamic Jihad in 1994 and 1995, which destroyed the peace process and led eventually to the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. But of course, Shimon Peres's intelligence, in fact, saved or salvaged the situation, but this is another matter. The other topic I want to raise is the extremist groups, the Haredim, as they called in Hebrew. The Haredim parties in Israel, it's important for us to know in which direction Israel is heading. There's nothing static, even demographically, because they multiply in large numbers. The number of Haredim in Israel, these are the ones who are extremists and do not serve in the army, and there are attempts to convince them to work. They don't do any job, they just get uh, allowances to study the religious text. Now they are convincing them of joining the high-tech industry. This is their number, also the estimates about their increase in their numbers. If you have the time or if you're interested enough, you can refer to these slides. The number of now the the rate of birth is higher than Arabs. They consider increasing their numbers and fertility a religious duty, and it's not right that the Arabs' birth of rate is higher than them. There was a time when this group was more focused on their own issues, and they were neutral politically. They used to go to the Knesset to impose their conditions on the type of food, was Dene Kashrut, kosher food, and others. And even in New York, they have successes in this field. In Dubai, too, somebody tells me. Uh, in the last 2 decades, now they have their second and third generations, and they were born in Israel, lived in Israel, and they used to be in the past anti-Zionist. Now they are part of Israeli racism, and a large number of them, especially from Eastern countries, they lived in our countries as a religious group, a religious sect. But the atmosphere of Israeli-Palestinian struggle turned them into Zionism and sometimes ultra-Zionism. And now they're playing a negative role in this regard. This is so far as the extreme is concerned. This is not fixed. There are variables, but by and large, their tendency, as I see it, is a tendency towards the right. Now they are divided into two parts. The authentic, if we can call it that, who started these religious parties, they are by and large from Eastern European countries, because the ones who lived in the United States and the UK did not immigrate to Israel. They have their ghettos until now. Mostly they are from Eastern European countries in the late 70s and early 80s. Some used to live with second generation Moroccan or Iraqi Jews, and they mixed together and they picked up this extremist attitude. And and they have the chief rabbi in Israel, who was from Ovada Yosef, and he defected to the other side, and he gradually changed the extremist religious discourse with he linked it with the Oriental culture, conservative Oriental culture, as we are saying. We used to live in Iraq and Morocco, and these are like they do not represent our identity. We are Eastern Jews, and they divided the Likud, the grassroots, and some of them belong to the movement known as Shas, which are like they represent Eastern Jews, but they are extremists. Some harbor illusions in the Arab world that maybe they can have some sort of an allegiance to their original countries. Maybe, and it's just a big maybe. It may not may apply to the first generation. It may have applied to the first generation if you are very very flexible. Maybe they had some sort of a nostalgia towards the life that the second and third generations they don't even know Arabic. They ones some may serve in the army, some may not. The identity here for those, this is constructed identity. The Eastern identity of these people is a model of constructed identity, similar to sectarianism in our countries, because they invent sectarianism to achieve a standing in society and secure political interests. So therefore, they build political movements around the identity. Whenever there is a coalition is formed, they they do not discuss matters like withdrawal from the West Bank or relations with the United States. They want to know how many ministerial jobs they'll be given. What about the percentage of religious content in school curricula and other issues only? Of course, they are more flexible than the other religious groups. At the time of the Rabin government, the Shahs supported them, but normally they are with the general right and they are against any withdrawal. They are more flexible because their priorities are not political; they're just demands which serve their interests. We talked a little bit about the Yair Lapid's movement. There is a future, and they inherited the Zionist left, and now they form the center-left parties symbolically only, not they. There are a lot of mistakes we make in understanding. We always judge by the dichotomy of good and bad. Yair Lapid, of course, he is a journalist. I remember a time when he interviewed me. Yair Lapid, he announced his movement in the Ariel settlement to send a message that he is, if there is any peace with the Palestinians, he accepts withdrawal, but not from the settlements. He has a mentality of security, but he is liberal socially and economically. He represents the Western lifestyle inside Israel. The other movement, I think this movement will stay and it will always have influence because this class is there, the middle class, the middle class, the businessmen. They want peace, but they want peace on their conditions. Of course, the nationalists are on the expansion. Benny Gantz, who was the former chief of staff, who was followed by Eisenkot. This is a movement which focuses on security matters primarily, and they are secularist, but he was prepared, instead of relying on Arab votes, by the way, they were prepared to give their votes to him. He went with Netanyahu and became defense minister, and he led the war on Gaza in 2014. And you may know his name because the former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett used to refuse to meet with the Palestinian leaders and President Mahmoud Abbas, and he used to send him instead. And this was a message in its own that whoever meets with Mahmoud Abbas is a security official, not the foreign minister, which means the issue of Palestinians should be dealt with from the point of view of security and not foreign relations. In Israel, they call this the mentality of the suburbs. This is how it's known. It's in Israel, because they say that if there is a district where armed men live amongst them, then Israel can bomb them into smithereens because basically they live in a military barracks or camp. This is their justification. I finished the political side of this, but I want to say a few words about the Israeli economy, because sometimes we underestimate these matters. Israel in the last 10 years, has become one of the advanced capitalist states in the world. And if you look at the economic crisis of 2008, Israel was not impacted by it, and Israel continued its growth, and this is the GDP. We're not talking about a rentier economy. It's an industrialized country. They manufacture things, they sell weapons. If you want to see, this is the rate of the inflation, less than half a percentage point. So this is a strong economy. Expenditure on R&D expenditure on research and development is 5.5%. 5.5% of the gross domestic product goes on R&D, and this includes also universities, army institutes developing weapons technologies, etc. And of course, this situation continues, although I'm talking about political division, 5 elections in 4 months, but the economy still grows and the country is stable, so that we know what we're dealing with. Of course, when it comes to the right of export, sorry, and this has increased by 350%. This is high-tech services and industries and the technology high-tech sector. Now, there are many things I do not have time to allude to, but if we want to discuss where does Israel export its 30% of Israel exports go to the United States, 28% to China, 5.1% India, then comes Europe, Holland first, then the United Kingdom, Belgium, Turkey, etc. And lately I was looking at Arab countries. There are exports which are not announced, of course, to the Israel exports to the UAE by the amount of 340 million, Egypt 121 million, then Morocco and other countries. This is after normalization, so 348 million to the UAE, 121 million to Egypt. Not big numbers, but there are exports. I think the security aspect of this is not made public. So this, of course, means other things. That this means that Israel is linked to the world. Is not an isolated country. So there are ways of pressurizing it because they have an advanced economy, a high standard of living. Until 1967, Israel was a Sparta, and then the economy was almost socialist now, and Israel is an advanced industrial state, a capital state, which means it can be impacted by the world and it can be impacting the world. And of course, Israel is not a country which is isolated that you cannot apply pressure to. It's a country which can influence the world and be influenced by the world through this network of relations. Also, the percentage of military expenditure and is very high, but it's less than Saudi Arabia. Military expenditure as a percentage of the GDP is very high, but it's less than many Arab countries. We think Israel is all about military expenditure. No, there are Arab countries. It's not, in fact, the size of the expenditure, but how you manage it and who manages it. And it's not a matter of just piling up weapons, buying them and stocking them. In fact, the Israel's percentage of GDP on military expenditure is less than other countries like Saudi Arabia, but it's all to do with the nature of the country.
So, of course, when it comes to the percentage of government expenditures, we can see that Arab countries spend more, some Arab countries spend more. Of course, if you have any questions regarding these topics, we can discuss it at a later stage. When it comes to the Arabs inside Israel, so there is some confusion, some ambiguity when it comes to how to deal with the Arab votes in the Knesset. Do they vote or do they abstain? And if they partake, can they change? Can they have an influence? Of course, as a result of the ideological positions or the preconceived ideas regarding this topic, and sometimes because of the lack of information, and this is not, or people are not to be blamed because of this. So the Arab public opinion lived in many states that use the Palestinian cause as a tool, even against other Arab countries. So the Arab regimes did not or were not concerned about spreading awareness. So people are against Israel. They do not need to know the details. However, sometimes there is policy that is adopted to spread the unknown. So we're talking about 19% of the population of the state. So actually, they felt they were not seen. Some people considered them traitors because they have Israeli citizenship. They did not understand it because any country you are born in, you hold their citizenship or their nationality. And during the peace process, some people considered them heroes. So, but we need to know that the Arabs of Israel are part of the Palestinian people. There are different currents. There's right, there's left, there's people working with the state. Some people joined the Zionist parties, just like all Arabs. So nothing special about this situation. So for me, in order to avoid generalizing, be it positive or negative, and in order not to issue value judgment without critical thinking, the Arabs in the last elections, here you can see the Arab votes. So 53 to 54% voted. It is difficult to know the exact figures because there are several mixed cities. So the estimate is 53 to 54%. Among the Jewish, we're talking about 70.5% as a percentage. So a higher percentage by approximately 20%. So Arab parties, three lists were during this election. They got 10 seats. The total number of votes is 10% of the votes in Israel. So we're talking about 10.7%. This is in 2022. In 2021, so it was 8.61%. So now in this election, there was a rise, there was an increase in the participation of the Arabs. In 2020, as you can see, you see the result. I would like to stop in 2015. The Arab parties, all of them ran in the elections on the joint list. During my presence in Palestine, that was my call. The only solution is for Arabs to be united in one list. Of course, this happened when I was here. So the joint list, United, got 13 seats. They got 446,000 votes, and the later elections they were divided into two blocks. One got 6, the other got 4. The level of percentage of the percentage of vote dropped to 7.8. And then they learned the lesson. They were united. They got 13 seats. 2020 they got 15 seats. Back then, nothing was special per se, but in the morning, Netanyahu decided to instigate the Jewish by saying that the Arabs are voting, so go and vote before the Arabs control the state. So he instigated against the Arabs, against their right to vote. So the reaction was an increasing Arab vote. For the first time in years, we saw a percentage of 65, so we're talking about 12.67, and then we saw 10 seats and 10 seats. After 2021, there was a disagreement after the elections in any state, just like any parliamentary regime, not presidential. So the president actually calls the list for consultation. So to ask them, who do you nominate for the position of prime minister? Of course, when you do not have a majority, a clear majority, the result leads to coalitions. So the Arabs, most of them nominated Gantz against Netanyahu. That was unprecedented because, in general, Arab parties used to abstain from nominating any name. So when I used to be asked, I would say, I abstain, I don't have any name, and I would go. It was very easy. So I have no candidate. And you preserve your national identity, your positions, and you carry on. So so one of the main reasons of the normalization of the relations with the Arab countries, so we're saying we are Arab citizens in Israel, and the Arab countries are normalizing. So other countries who are not citizens are normalizing. I think at the moral level, this had a high impact or influence. Some people decided to nominate and to secure some demands. So if we stay outside, we will continue on the lobbying and the protests and the Knesset questions and investigating or interrogating a minister. So you get your rights gradually, step by step. But here, this is a bargaining, according to some. It was a bargaining. So we support this person in exchange for. So just like the Jewish parties. Of course, that was a strong miscalculation, not from ethical, moral perspective. This is actually clear for me. This is important. There is no life without ethics for you, for your children, for the future generation. So we are talking about an ethical issue relating to the Palestinian identity and the alliance with the colonial settlement. It was a schizophrenic attitude, and this distorts your image and the society. So we're talking about an ethical issue. And then, pragmatically speaking, it had no foundation. They would not accept, not at all, anything that affects the Jewish nature of the state. You are an alien. In my analysis, actually, in one of my books, in the first definition, the most important law that Ben Gurion pushed forward at the level of the Knesset is the citizenship law. There's two forms of citizens in Israel. And I have a long analysis about it. The first one is every Jewish person in the world. So, being Jewish, any Jewish individual has the right to become a citizen of Israel the moment they get to Israel. This is the core value of the state of Israel. What else do you need? So, in order to define apartheid, what else can I say? Some other citizens accidentally uh, became here. So, of course, people who remained despite our efforts. So, some people remained here, they have the right to citizenship. But that was not the purpose of the state. The objective of the state is to give citizenship to every Jewish in the world, and of course, protection. So, this is why I talked about the core and contingent citizenship. So, this in the second category, we have the Arab Israelis. And when five Arab MPs were used to vote for Oslo, and actually for a specific settlement that was to define the fate of Oslo. So he was killed, and the nature of the state did not change, and Netanyahu won the elections. And this time, when they relied on them in the elections, the next elections, the party got 0 votes, and Netanyahu was elected. And throughout this year, there was no major change when it comes to the situation of or the status of Arabs in Israel. So the rights they got were the result of the struggle and the resilience, and they had also some by products, or there was some byproduct, which is the fact that Israel is a state of institutions. So, on the sidelines of the Jewish democracy, they benefited as individuals, and they benefited at the level of the parliament. But you shouldn't offer concessions and get into a coalition that is Judaizing the Al Aqsa Mosque. So, from a pragmatic perspective, that was wrong. From the ethical perspective, it was wrong. And politically, it was wrong. So, there was a surprise when it comes to the huge number of votes. They had 1 month. There was a disagreement the eve of the elections. There was a disagreement. There was only 1 month. For 1 month, I think there was a great achievement. The others were ready to enter a coalition. The others were ready only to join a coalition if it's the secular centrist coalition. So the Unified Arab List here, and also you have the other movement, the Democratic Front, are ready to join the secular liberal alliance of Yair, and the National Bloc, of course, refuses this sort of coalition. So that was the source of disagreement, but this did not result in a reduction of the number of MPs, Arab MPs. So they got 10, and it is an important discussion for the future of this struggle. Why is it important? So I would like to conclude. I have been talking for 1 hour, 13 minutes. Thank you so much. I would like to conclude. Thank you, Dr. Azmi, for this valuable lecture. Now the floor is open for questions. So we'll have one round of questions, and then Dr. Azmi will answer. Dr. Hassan, thank you, Dr. Azmi, for this valuable lecture. I have a question relating to the introduction when you talked about the decision of Ben Gurion to have state, centralized state, the definition of the state, the control of the state, the official policy that was adopted. The divisions, the internal divisions were uh, controlled. But I think now there is a democratic shift uh, in Israel, and the Zionist unity when it comes to the territory is no longer a factor. So the position vis-à-vis the peace process did not actually define the behavior of the Israeli voter. So I saw a piece of information, the Hadim, 4% the demographic level, and this would lead to a change within the Israeli society. In your opinion, would this lead to a divide within the Zionist society about the identity of the state? Because there are different parties, Zionist parties. Some people want religious state, not just a Jewish or a state for the Jewish. So Baruch Kamerlin talked about it, the cultural confrontation within the Israeli society. What do you think about this? Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Dr. Azmi, I would like to add something to this question because we talked about Haridim and the demography and the burden. So they get assistance without contributing. Is it a point of weakness or a point of strength? Are they a burden because they just receive assistance? Yes, doctor. The floor is yours. Good evening. Thank you for this valuable lecture. As to my question, what is the role of Arabs, be it in Palestine or abroad, in terms of the increasing extremism in Israel? Because the extremism and moderation is always based on the price of extremism. For instance, the Israeli voters, if they have challenges, for instance, the Palestinian Authority, there are no challenges because the Palestinian Authority helps and Arab countries are normalizing. So there is no logic in Israel to say we need to offer concessions. So is this idea logical? So would this lead to extremist behavior or attitude because the moderates do not have a say? Mr. Anas? Thank you, Dr. Azmi. My question is regarding the seats of the Arabs in the previous elections. It was the same, but why did other blocs not lose, but the assembly lost? Dr. Saud? The votes, could we understand where did they come from regarding the Arab votes? So they came from some other place. What about, so we're talking about 140,000 approximately. This is the last question, and then Dr. Azmi answers. شكرا جزيلا دكتور على هذا العرض. سعادة سفير جنوب أفريقيا، لاحظت في عرضكم أشرتم إلى نقطة مرتبطة بقوة الاقتصاد الإسرائيلي وأن الاقتصاد الاقتصادي ينمو وهناك تقدم في المجال التكنولوجي والأمني. هل هذا يعني من أن حركات شعبية يمكن أن تؤدي، على سبيل المثال حركات مقاطعة إسرائيل، هل لديها تأثير أقل أو أكثر بالمقارنة مع مقاطعة نظام الأبرتايد في جنوب أفريقيا؟ Yeah, so so it wasn't a question at the beginning, but when it comes to the demography and the Haredim, yes, just like Dr. Marwan added, yes, there is a change. Of course, there's a change. For instance, Jerusalem, the nature of Jerusalem changed. That they are a key component of the society in Jerusalem. It's completely different than Tel Aviv, for instance. The religious aspect of the city is obvious in Jerusalem. Now they are trying to direct them to mixed cities. For instance, Akka, one of the cities, is originally an Arab city, and also this is the city of Ahmad al-Shukari. So this is an Arab city, and now as a result of the change that happened at the demographic level, there is a threat for them that this would become an Arab city once again. So they send them, they direct them to these cities in order for them to affect the demography of these cities. So, of course, this will gradually change the country. From a political and economic perspective, are they a point of weakness? Yes, especially that they have become active when it comes to the political life. So now they are involved in the politics relating to different or all the Israeli society. So they're talking about halal, haram, what's allowed and what's not allowed. Also, the Shabbat, Saturday laws or rules. In the 70s, they agreed on the status quo, the secular religious status quo, but now they are infiltrating. They want a more religious lifestyle. But of course, there is diversity in Israel. So at the cultural level, there's a vibrant society when it comes to the universities, etc. So there is some sort of fear. There is some sort of opposition. So could this become something or like a factor in the future? Yes, I think the future conflict is between the religious people and the secular people when it comes to the lifestyle, because the East and the West is actually disappearing. Shas, of course, is preserving, or they are preserving the identity. But from the West and from the East, they intermarriage and they have a new identity that's not necessarily Ashkenazi or other. So, but this religious aspect is actually about a position vis-a-vis the lifestyle, and this is a conflict that is coming, of course. When it comes to the question of Dr. Abdul Wahab as to the role of the Palestinians outside and the Arab states, there is a mythology regarding the role of Arabs. Israel actually, and its propaganda inside and outside. Before the war of 1967 and later on, the Arabs want to throw the Jews in the sea. Of course, this is a propaganda, this is a lie, and of course they had a difficulty to find evidence that a regime is calling for that. The propaganda in the 60s, the Arab regimes had their media, so they could use some terminology in the Arab media to mobilize people inside and outside. So there is an existential threat, and the Jews could face another genocide and the revival of the Holocaust idea. The revival of the Holocaust idea in Israeli politics started in 1967. Maybe not many people know between 48 and 67 there was a silence when it comes to the Holocaust in Israel. They did not talk about it because this for them used to be considered a shame, a source of shame. The Jewish people of the exile, they were against Zionists and they were actually not resisting and they were massacred. And the ethos of the Israelis is the opposite of the exile. Uh, they do not want the weak image. So between 48 and 67, Holocaust was not an issue. But before the 1967 war, they revived the idea of the Holocaust, and we are encircled. They will massacre us, and this sort of mythology, this projection of the Holocaust experience, actually contributes to mobilizing people and support of not necessarily the more extremist leadership, but also the military and the security aspect. And from another, or in addition to that, as you have said, so capitulating and what the so-called moderate speech, that is not moderate, it is extremist to the other party. So accepting Israel as is, as a Jewish state in the region, and also saying that the Arabs made mistakes, we were extremists, etc., without any solution to the Palestinian cause, without any concession offered by Israel, results to a more extremist position. And this is 100% true, and this is what's happening now. So this position that is using some terms, some words against the Jews, not based on any strategy, any realistic program to fight Israel, moving to the total capitulation and to saying that mea culpa, etc. I think uh, they are both two sides of the coin, so the same coin. So the side that considers Israel a democracy, the Arabs were mistaken. Israel is the true ally of the Arabs, and the Palestinians are our enemies. This is the other side of the coin of the speech about throwing the Jews in the sea. They both lead to the extremism because if the Arabs capitulate, why would Israel need to change its policy? If you are accepting everything and you admire my system. You admire my system. Why would I need to change? Why would I need to change my policy? This is why all these negotiations actually are useless because there is no need for Israel to change its policy. However, if there is a real threat that the occupying entity is facing, in addition to a realistic political or pragmatic political proposal, this would make a change. So it is not throwing them in the sea or capitulating. You have to have a political program that gives political solutions that include them, and at the same time, you have a power. So, as to the normalization without them paying anything in return that happened lately, and of course, we cannot have enough words to define the first normalization. For me, this is a condemnation without but. But for Egypt, at least they justified it by regaining control of Sinai. But this is not true. The 1967 war was for Palestine, not Sinai. Sinai was with them. So now, despite that, they had something to say, they had something to offer. Afterwards, the question is, Normalizing in exchange for what? There are no words to describe this, in my opinion. And look at the results in the first list. The right is becoming more extremist, more arrogant. Yes, more arrogant and more extreme. So I think that this pattern of moderate speech increases the extremism of Israel. Of course, the problem is that some people are marketing it, are promoting it as if this is beneficial to the Palestinian cause. Why do they say it? I don't know. There is absolutely no relation. You have other objectives that have nothing to do with Palestine, and the damage is done. The damage is done to the Palestinian cause. The settlements are increasing in an unprecedented way in the last year. Even the Palestinian Authority is encircled. They reject talking with them. The wars against Gaza are ongoing, and there is no positive result, just negative result. Israel is accepted now in the region as part of the different axes in the region. So we agree on this, Dr. Abdul Wahab. As to whether this is logical, no, this is not logical. I agree with you. There is actually an opposite logic. A coalition or an alliance with the bad Israel that we know. So I used to say this is an alliance and not a normalization. As to the question of Mr. Anas, there were several reasons. But of course, historically was the smallest and the youngest party among the coalition. But there was an element of surprise. So the alliance was broken before the announcement of the list. And one party cannot win. Why would I give them my vote? This could have been a logic, but I think uh, maybe they are the strongest party alone without being in an alliance. This is something that could be built upon, and this is linked with the question of Dr. Saud regarding the foundation. Of course, people, main voters are voters who used to boycott the elections for national reasons, for different reasons. The Social Foundation, this is a national party with a diverse the diversity of supporters. If you examine the uh, demographic map of the Arabs in Israel, you would see that the distribution of the votes, maybe the Bedouin areas, the tribal areas, the clans areas, and the south of Palestine, and some places in the north, they were the weakest. But in other places, the main urban conglomerations, they came first or second. So I expect that they were the first among the youth. So of course we cannot know the figures, and this is my projection. And in my opinion, if there's any survey, I think they are the main power among the youth. Of course, there are other people who do not vote, and if they vote, they would vote in favor uh, of them. But among the youth, they are the first, and I think they have a good future if they organize their ranks. It is difficult for them. The Northern Islamic movement, they have zakat committees, they have mosques, but they do not have this. It is a national movement, so they need to do something differently. So if they know how to organize their ranks, the future is theirs. But we need to know that a government with these extremist parties is going to make their life difficult. They need to be wise, and we cannot talk about all these things now. So regarding the economy and the effect of boycotting, as I said, the economy of Israel is strong and it is strongly intertwined with the military industry. So that the link between the military industry and the civil industry is intertwined. So we see this shift, especially when it comes to the micro optics that Israel is famous for, and also the high tech. Main high tech companies is about American companies who moved to Israel, out of Palestine. Of course, they have startups, Waze, for instance. So some Israeli startups were successful. However, Intel, Google, mega corporations moved to Israel. So there's a major support by US corporations to Israel. So the military economy receives the support from the multinationals in their work in Palestine. They have a very serious work on the agricultural industry and the different methods and other methods. And also they have relations with the entire world. They have trade exchange with the world. Of course, they have weapons experts. We don't see them, so they don't have a special category. They talk about equipment. They talk about advanced. They talk about services sometimes, but we're talking about military exports in reality. As to the boycotting, I think the boycotting in principle is a moral or movement. I think or ethical position. I think the harm is very limited. In South Africa, boycotting became impactful when countries joined this movement, especially the West, Western Europe, and the United States. But at least Africa had boycotting. There was an international boycotting of South Africa. The popular boycotting was ethical when it comes to the mobilizing against the apartheid, but it was not decisive when it comes to the reforms, etc. The official boycotting led to this result. In the case of Israel, it is the opposite. The Arab boycotting is broken. The Arab countries, many Arab boycotting, many Arab countries are no longer boycotting Israel. And of course, as you know, the relations between Israel and the West are ongoing. So does it mean that the BDS or other boycotting movements are not important? No, they are important because when it comes to the global public opinion, Israel does not want to be categorized as apartheid state. Israel does not want to be under this category. So this is important for Israel, like the youth, the intellectuals, universities in the world. They do not want to be perceived as apartheid regime. Israel considers itself the only democracy in the Middle East. This is the first thing. The second thing is that the Palestinian cause needs to remains alive, and this is very disturbing for them. The BDS movement is important, but we need to manage our expectations. So economically, it's not going to defeat Israel, but it is important to point to Israel and say this is an apartheid regime, and this might lay the foundation for future confrontation. But this is important. Of course, Israel did not start as an apartheid. They did not use this slogan, but it is beneficial to use this slogan because I think that the structure of the Israeli entity is becoming more and more an apartheid structure. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take a second round of questions. Dr. Muldi, then thank you, Dr. Azmi, for this valuable presentation. I will be speaking from the point of view of a non-specialist person, not the other way around. The presentation depicted Israel as a very solid entity, very advanced economically. It's modern and invests in knowledge and not isolated from the rest of the world, and also advancing towards mixing religious nationalism with nationalism. There is no questions about the state and its legitimacy, only on resources and the Palestinian question. So what are the weak points then when we describe an enemy from the point of view of resistance? Then the resistance should seek the points of weakness. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Now, just first tell us when do you want to finish? It's 20 to 8. We'll take this round and see. Hello. My question is... yes, we can hear you. My question is about the Palestinians who live inside Israel. Are they impacted by the Arabs in the rest of the Arab world? For the Arabs outside Israel, we don't know much about what goes on inside Israel so far as the Arab population is concerned. And when we look at the results of the latest elections, we hear that the impact of normalization was evident. I find this a little bit hard to understand because the countries who normalize are not big Arab countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, or Algeria. When they do something like that, it has a big impact. Maybe it was more of a ceremonial thing rather than a strategic move. And the number of, we cannot say all Arab countries moved in the same direction. So therefore, I don't think this is a good enough justification. I think they just were waiting the opportunity and they decided what they wanted to do. If the latest elections showed the Likud and there is a retreat for the left, so the struggle is between right camps, rightists against rightists, and why is the Israeli left on the retreat? We move to this side of the hall. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Doctor, for this presentation. My question is about the right. Is it in the center? Is it on the peripherals, on the margins? And where are the radical ideas? Are they still in the center or where are they? Thank you. Good afternoon. My question may be outside the scope of Israeli elections, but about the Indian presence in Israel and its impact on the social, political, and economic seen in the long run, especially in view of a strategic partnership between Israel and India? Last question, please. Question. Thank you, Doctor. My question is, will the return of a Netanyahu government will mean that the collapse of the Algeria agreement, the return of a Netanyahu government will mean more security collaboration and the collapse of the Palestinian reconciliation agreement in Algiers? Let's take one question. Good afternoon. A direct question. What does it mean if Netanyahu comes back to power? What does that mean to Palestinians? Assalamu alaikum. My question is on the return of Netanyahu to power regarding the agreement between Israel and Lebanon on the maritime borders. Will Netanyahu government impact this agreement? Because in the election campaign, Netanyahu was against the agreement. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Ali Zalat from Al Jazeera. Thank you, Doctor. When you talked about the economy, now Israel wants to become a hub for natural gas, especially after the agreement with the Lebanon. How will this impact the Israeli economy? And now the right is making advances. Will this impact the idea of resistance in the Palestinian camp in any future? And also, we in the younger generation, for example, where the normalization was imposed on us. Now, with the retreat of the Arab Spring, for example, the Egyptian church Twadros visited the Palestinian territories for the first time. And finally, the Palestinian youth and their participation in Israeli elections, and for example, what happened to the Al Kurd family in Sheikh Jarrah and others. So, what will be the future of the Palestinian youth? Thank you very much. Let us. Now you have 10 questions. I still have social media questions. Dr. Mordi's question is an important question. I think all these elements that we talked about wouldn't have been points of strength if there was a real Arab front confronting Israel, because all of them will not stand up. These are points of strength in normal circumstances when a country lives in a state of peace with no wars or confrontation with others. But under real pressures, the situation will be different. For this reason, if you want points of weakness, I'll mention two. First, the current structure of Israel after the borders of 67, because it's controlling most of the historical Palestine, and half of this population are Arabs. And also, if you talk about Israel as outside the question of citizens and citizenship, now half of the population of Israel are Arabs, this is likely to turn into a source of constant tension. Now, it does not impact the country, but it can in any moment. I remember the first time when Israel suffered lack of foreign investments, when the first intifada and the investments almost completely stopped and they were resumed after the intifada, the uprising. So every time there is tension, of course, this will impact investment and economy, whether we're talking about the democratic situation, the economic situation. If there is a Palestinian national struggle, then this will impact things. In fact, in the borders that Israel occupied after 67, Israel has become an apartheid state. Secondly, the struggle, the power struggle, which denied Israel of real political stability, if the religious secular struggle is compounded in Israel, we will not see the same stability. There were moments in their history before. Now the demographic change and the increase in the number of religious people, and this is a continuous trend, this is a point of weakness. But but from the point of view of objectivity, there is no point of weakness just like that. These points of weakness appear in states of struggle and instability. Now, with the stability which prevails and the normalization, there are countries who have normalized and countries who have not, but they accept the situation. Points of weakness did not appear, but in the first intifada, they appeared, and the Israeli Labor Party came to power. They were completely, as a Likud in 77 was completely in control, but because of the Intifada, they had to renegotiate with the Arabs because they admitted they had no cure for the Intifada. So therefore, especially in the current difficult Arab circumstances, which struggle within the border of Israel and the West Bank and Gaza Strip can lead to real changes. But because it's not current, it's not happening, Israel as a state appears too strong because the situation around it is very normal. Let's look at the 1973 war. If we take that war taking place with a strong modern country, um, maybe it was Israel was stronger than now because the Labour Party was ruling. That war caused them into a state of panic. Now, a simple example in comparison, the Lebanese resistance from 2000 to 2006. Until 2000, the Lebanese resistance, if you count the losses, they were very humble, minimal to Israel, but their ability to sustain that was difficult. From you remember the 77, 78, which the Lebanese, the South Lebanese army was formed. Then 1982, the Israeli invasion. Then Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon without a peace agreement. This is very important because there were demonstrations. They simply could not sustain the casualties. What appeared in the beginning as strong, that was a static thing. When the dynamics of the struggle began to appear, the situation has changed. And Also, the Oslo Agreement, the the Israeli capital entirely rallied around Rabin because the first Intifada really impacted the economy. I think if you look at the tables again, from Oslo onwards, there was a leap in Israeli rates of growth. So if you take Israel as a static situation, Israel appears very strong, but it's all linked to struggle and resistance and other factors. I thank you for your question because some people may think what I'm saying is we are hopeless. I mean, if you look at the Vietnam versus the United States or Algeria versus France, looking at the static picture, you'll think there is no hope. But once you start your struggle, then cracks start appearing in the enemy's lines. As for the question on being impacted by the Arab situation, any reality is complex. In the case of the Palestinians inside Israel, it's even more complicated because living under Israeli law, Israeli society, Israeli economy, and at the same time having a sort of a loyalty to the Arab nation and Arab nationalism in sociology, social psychology, and other studies would reveal that this is a very complex situation. How can you be an Israeli citizen demanding your rights and deep down you know you are an Arab, like for the funeral of Jamal Abdel Nasser, all of the Palestinians came out in support. When the war on Iraq started, they all went out to the street, but of course, on the day they feel very agitated, very emotional, but the following day they go back to the normality of everyday life and the impact of Israeli law, Israeli economy, etc. This will take a long time. We don't have time for that now, but there are there are some Arabs who join Zionist parties, similar to Arabs in other countries, Arab countries who side with the government in authority because they want their interests, they want to gain something, and of course, there are many even sayings and in our folklore and you can find many things like things like don't bite the hand that feeds you or an alive coward is better than a dead hero or something. There are lots of things people can resort to justify that. Of course, there was, on the other hand, there were attempts to organize themselves. They organized themselves into political parties to serve political aspirations. After the normalization, for example, there was contacts with Arab countries like you would find at that time Egypt supporting certain factions, Jordan and the PLO, etc. And this had its impact, of course. You cannot say that, in fact, since the PLO started uh, focusing directly on the Palestinians inside Israel, this had an impact, undoubtedly. I want to be very cautious. I don't want to mix things, but if I have the ability to think pragmatically, to join government coalitions and they set the Palestinian question, the Palestinian cause aside because the people pressurize these parties. They say you're joining the Knesset to do what? What about our rights? And we're talking about large sections of society. So why they can say, why don't I leave the Palestinian cause aside? Leave it to the people who own it. We are living in Israel. Although this may sound opportunistic, and if there is, of course, if there is Arab countries normalizing with Israel, such ideas become more acceptable and more justifiable in the eyes of the people. Of course, there are those who are weak inside because sometimes some Arab countries opening their doors to these people. Of course, when they shut their doors closed in the face of some Palestinians and open it, to others, then can encourage people. Of course, this led to many negative things inside Palestine and outside it. There was a question from Al Jazeera. I think he was the last one who asked the question. At the level of Arab people, the Arab peoples are not normalizing whether Egypt or Jordan. What we're talking about here, the regimes and their official propaganda organs, the state-controlled media. The peoples, by and large, have not accepted the idea of normalization. Also, the Israeli left is on the retreat now. Historically, that happens for two reasons. Secondly, for the oppressive and aggressive right-wing policies which empower the rightists and weaken the leftists. But there are also social reasons. It was the left, or more specifically, the Zionist left, which established Israel, and they started with the Istadrot labor movements and syndicates, etc., and the agricultural communities. This sector in the Israeli economy, from a demographic point of view, is not that strong. Now, all the agricultural settler communities have not been that strong, and after privatization also they lost a lot of their impact, and the Israeli economy is not based on the proletariat as it was in the past, which used to sort of look after parties like the Labour Party. And the biggest, there was a Liberal Party which completely disappeared. It was around in 60s and 70s. It was reliant on the middle classes. Now the middle classes now are who inherited the Zionist left, and so this socio-economic factor has led to the demise of the left. Also, the policies by the left, which is their policies, in fact, were rightist policies. How can you be a leftist when you use biblical things like we should not give any concessions on Jerusalem for religious reasons, or on Judea and Samaria for religious reasons? The Labour Party in when in 1967 Israel occupied they did not use Judea and Samaria. They called it the areas under control or managed areas. But with the passage of time, the religious discourse found itself into their discourse and so on and so forth. So the religious nationalist extremism led to the demise of the left and the rise of the right wing. I think I answered the point on the center and the peripherals. About India, yes, it's outside the scope of this lecture. I don't have figures, but from the day the Janata Party came to power, a strong relationship started. They, in fact, started. India was a natural ally of the Palestinians when the days of the non-alignment movement, and Yasser Arafat was a celebrated guest in India. And India was a major power in the non-alignment movement, and the government in India was above factionalism and sectarianism. So the Palestinian cause was above the religious aspect, and the Palestinian cause and Palestinian figures were welcomed. But this current party, which relying on the Hindu nationalist religious trends and the rise of the Palestinian Islamist movements, so every party who wants to use the Palestinian cause against their government, it was easier for them to attack the Palestinian cause on the pretext that this is a religious cause. So it's more normal for Hindus to ally themselves with the Israelis rather than Muslims. For example, the Greek were natural allies of the Palestinians, but when the Palestinian cause became the cause of Muslims, the Greeks sided with Israel. I think now the relationship between India and Israel has gone beyond all of that, and the problem is now there is an alliance which really incites hatred against Islam and Muslims, and also there is real cooperation now in industry and at the military level and others. I think the Janata Party now, in all, is really taking a reactionary stance in all major cases in the world. And when we, from our point of view as Arabs and Palestinians, we look at that when, but for them, the, because there was a secularist party ruling India. Now it's a religious party. It's a Hindu party. So before that, it was the Indian National Congress, which was a national liberation movement, and they looked at Hindus and Muslims equally, and India's positions vis-à-vis all Arab causes was positive. Now it's different. India, we can it can take us a long time if we want to talk about things. It's an important about the alignment, the maritime borders. Regarding Lebanon, I think this was the question. The delineation, I was asked, was this normalization or not? The question of is not about definitions. I think what we're talking about is the nature of the regime, which sounds it. in the truce of 1948 had an element of borders in it and delineation, but it did not stop wars coming after that in 1967. Maybe the motives here is economic this time. Is I think there are powers in Lebanon which want normalization and others that Israel is looking at this as an agreement which can be profitable to Israel. Leave aside all the triumphalism and others. Netanyahu speaks in terms of election. If there is one feature about Netanyahu is which he is known by and for is lying. He lies all the time. He said he will, when he comes to power, he will abolish this agreement. Of course, this is nonsense. He will not. He will keep the agreement, and everybody in Israel, all the security leadership, Israel, the army and the security agencies, all are with the agreement. They think this will create joint economic interests and will avoid wars, regardless of there is normalization. Both sides will have economic interests, so Netanyahu will not do anything. Just forget about all the rhetoric. If he finds allies in his coalition who are willing to negotiate with the PLO, he would do that, and Hamas even. But this will be dependent on the coalition partners he eventually gets into an agreement with. Netanyahu is not a man known for his word and principles. He is a lying politician of the first class. And Dr. Abdul Karim asked, what does it mean for Netanyahu to come back to power? As we said, this can mean an escalation, or it can mean if the Arabs had a decisive stance, he will move in the other direction. But in the current circumstances, and people like Netanyahu feel that the circumstances confirm their positions and their self confidence increases. If you want to summarize Netanyahu's political doctrine, when he was deputy ambassador in Washington, then he became Israel's representative at the UN. He had endless interviews. He had two books. He had a book entitled A Place Under the Sun or something like that. And he talked about a world war against terrorism. He is one of the ideologues who wrote extensively about the Western civilization's main enemy being terrorism. And he used to speak in this language at a time when nobody talked about it. His brother died in the operation and attack on Entebbe in Uganda. His brother commanded the operation, but he was killed in it. And the operation was named after Jonathan, his brother. So he and his family used the name of his brother to establish an international organization against terrorism. For this reason, he says the main enemy of the Western civilization, of course, after 9/11, he became the number one guest on his books, bestsellers. Secondly, the main thing is not what Arabs can do. The question for them is the strength of Israel. If Israel is strong enough, the Arab would acquiesce to that. And he feels that Israel is strong and Israel can dictate the terms, and he was true and right, like he says, I told you so. And this is first, but if the Arabs are willing to give concessions without anything in return, so why not? And he thinks if Israel continues, the rest of the Arabs. Having said that, I remind you that on the eve of his election and the Arab Spring in 2011, he was in negotiations with the Bashar al-Assad regime, and he was willing to give concessions on the Golan Heights. Hof, the American mediator, and also Turkey was the mediator before that between him and Bashar al-Assad. But when the Arab Spring started, yeah, he wrote a book about this. Let's stop everything, they decided, until we 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 understand what the future of these regimes will be. But this man used to think that despite all of this, that peace with the Arabs or with the Syrians was a worthwhile undertaking. And until 1996, Israel was not ready to withdraw, the second withdrawal, but he withdrew from Hebron because he announced that he will build a tunnel to under or beneath East Jerusalem. And of course, there was a big uprising. Even the Palestinian security agencies members took part, and 14 Israeli soldiers were killed. Over 30 Palestinian security members were killed. He sounds really tough, but in the ultimately he is willing to give concessions. I think the problem lies with the Arabs. We must turn this presentation around and talk about the Arab and Palestinian situation. This is the number one and main theme for us, or not what Netanyahu will do or won't do. Uh, Netanyahu is not that strong. I gave you two examples that he almost collapsed overnight. I think we finished now. Thank you very much indeed, and may God bless you all. Thank you very much, Dr. Azmi. I apologize for all those we couldn't take their questions. We went beyond our lecture. We thank Dr. Azmi for a very valuable presentation. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to all our followers over social media. Thank you very much.